space for a number of businesses in international roles. And so since 2018, I've been self-employed, and I love the freedom and variety that gives me, basically. I'm a member of AMEC, and I'm also a member of the Institute for Public Relations Measurement Commission, and that's probably more than enough to get us started.
All right, thank you, Sunday. So my name is Robert Awodu, and I'm the head of public relations and communication for Jumia Nigeria. And I know most of you know Jumia, so I won't go on about what we do, right? So talking more on how I got to this position, it'd be interesting to note that I actually have a background in engineering, so I never saw myself doing PR or communication. But it's something that I was passionate about even while in school, and my journey has been around communication, marketing, and then PR. So I have started from the very bottom with copywriting, and advertising, and things like that, and I've grown within the system. So worked across the e-commerce space, financial services, as well as the IT sector. And also one other interesting thing is I started my career with Jumia, but I left to do these other things that I had mentioned. And then this year I came back to Jumia, my current position. Yeah, so I think that's it in a nutshell. I wouldn't want to go a lot into the various details across the other businesses I've worked at.
Okay, so my first point would be to say, don't start with the measures. Start with the objectives. Start thinking about what it is that your organization wants to achieve and what contribution can be made by communication. So that would be my first point. Don't start with the measures. Start with the objectives, as it were. Another really important point in all of this is really understand and take on board the difference between measurement, analysis, and evaluation. They hang together, but too often they get used synonymously, and people talk about measurement when they really mean evaluation, and they talk about evaluation when all they do is really just measurement. So that, I think that is really important. So very briefly, so measurement for me is basically can answer the what question if you want. Measurement gives you the numbers, it tells you what happened. You know, often we call this descriptive analysis, but that for me also is a bit of a misnomer because description is description, not analysis. So that's the measurement part. Measurement just gives you the number, not more, not less. It's important, but it's just a starting point. Analysis then goes a bit further than the what. It gives you the how. Analysis is diagnostic. It helps us understand how things hang together. But really, evaluation is the top of that pile, if you want. That gets you to the why. So you have to do good measurement and analysis, and then you go into the evaluation phase. You draw conclusions, you glean insights, you recommend a course of action. That's how you go from descriptive analysis to predictive analysis to what people call prescriptive analysis. So you do a diagnosis, you figure out what's the case, and then you make recommendations as to how to improve the situation. Yeah. No, that's fine.
We're in the same bucket, so it's not like we're fighting each other, right? I mean, you've got to take the actions before you can measure the outcomes, right? So it's essentially within the same bucket. They're really but if you want to put them in silos, you are free to do that. But measurement essentially enables us to be able to track, what it is that we're doing, so that we can either change the course of our action or reinforce the actions that we've taken. All right. So it's a value chain thing. So it's linked, right? However, we may want to then start to look at it from a siloed perspective, in which case we want to become more niche and then focus on an aspect of the practice which looks at outcomes. All right. And enables us to be able to change strategy and then change our tactical, deployments, right? Because we're monitoring and then we're measuring, we're evaluating. And from evaluation, we're able to see quite clearly where we're going right or what we're doing wrong, so that we can actually change the course of our actions. So for me, I don't think there's any quarrel regarding both spheres. I think there are indeed very, very pungent linkages that speak to the fact that except we're able to measure what we're doing, we cannot come to the table, with a pride, saying that this is what our contribution has been over the last couple of months, years, and all of that. And this is what we've added. So beyond the whole talk about there being some form of partnership, I think what needs to happen increasingly is that, if you are a niche-focused agency that is focused on measurement, you need to actually get out there and speak to the guys working, designing the strategy and executing, the campaigns and all of that seeks to be measured. And you have to bring to the table copious value. So it's not enough to say I measure and I evaluate and that's my niche, that's my focus. It's enough for you to then bring to the table how that works for the guys on the execution side, in such a way that partnership works real good. All right. So I wouldn't see it as really like we're two different fields. It's not two different fields. It's a continuum. I have to design the strategy and then design, the tactical roadmaps. I then go on to execute. I then need to then monitor the media, which, is more like the mediation platform upon which I deploy my tactical actions based on my strategy. And then, of course, because I want some measure of independence around what I am doing, or some measure of transparency, I would rather use the word transparency, around what I'm doing. I then choose to allow a third party audit that process in terms of monitoring what I've done, measuring the outcomes therefrom, and then evaluating what that looks like, what we could have done better, and where the gaps are. So you need to be out there trying to forge partnerships, right? And forging partnerships will mean that, in order to engender transparency, there's probably a need to have a siloed, process that is different from execution, doing the measurement side of things, so that there can be some transparency when we come to the table. All right, we've done it. So this is what P+ is saying about what we've done. This is what Sishon report is saying about what we've done. This is what Meltwater is saying about what we've done. And then we also need to know how. You also need to explain the efficacy of your proprietary solutions, in such a way that if the practitioners on the execution side do not have your sophistication because you are niche, they begin to then see the value you are bringing to the table, and that allows that partnership to actually happen. So for now, that's where I want to stop.
Okay, thank you. So I agree with what the other speakers have said, and I just want to touch on a few things. So I feel like the very first step, like they've rightly said, is to set your goals or your objectives, right? And like, what's the most important objective you want to achieve with your PR or your communication or whatever initiatives you're trying to do in the company? So that's the most strategic way to go, and being able to tie it into the company's own strategic goals would also help in getting buy-in from the necessary stakeholders within the business. So once that is done, it is now all about measuring the impact and then making room to evaluate it and be able to tweak whatever strategy you set from the beginning. So understanding that PR is a means to an end and not necessarily the end in itself, right? It's also paramount when you're measuring what's the value or the impact of the strategy, PR strategy you set from the very beginning. So in all, I would say yes, the synergy can work best if from the very beginning you have defined clearly what those objectives are, and then you measure as you go along. Also, one very important part is the fact that most times we see people use agencies, right? And then the same agency that is, should I say, going about pushing your PR initiative is the same agency that is measuring it. And I oftentimes feel that that shouldn't be the case, because one person putting out the initiative and then measuring what they are doing would more or less, there will be bias in clearly defining if whatever they are doing is right or wrong. So most times I feel, especially in this part of our market, is to clearly use different agencies in both cases. So you have one that is you are using for carrying out your PR initiatives, and then another one that is measuring what the impact is that you clearly define at the very beginning. Yes, I think I would leave it at that.
Obviously, I think, as some of the other panelists have said, the goal setting and specifically smart objectives are crucial. But what I found through the years is that even though this is a very nice kind of theoretical approach, a lot of communicators don't do that. They don't have a specific goal. They just send out stuff and hope to get some media coverage. And that's why they're struggling to measure. So for me, probably the most crucial, and I've seen it with some of the clients we've managed to move over to best practices, we always talk about the measurement journey. And it is a continuous education of the brand of the agency, on how best practices work. And it is not that complex, but people kick against it, it's out of their comfort zone. So for me, probably the most important would be education. I was privileged enough to do the PR Academy's international certificate for AMEC. That was before Thomas's time. And I don't know if it's still as difficult, but it was a very, very good course. But from an AMEC perspective, we've even now created a lot more free or very low cost kind of training solutions. We're launching a framework tutorial now in December for the integrated evaluation framework. So education for me is key. and that opens up a lot of avenues for exploration. And I think that it's just having those conversations with the clients, with the agencies, and have continuous conversations. You're not just going to have one with them, because that's not how advertising works. Advertising works about keeping repeating the same message. And that's why we have to keep on educating ourselves, but also our clients and stakeholders about how best practices look like. And then it makes it much easier to adopt it. I'll answer that. Um, I think the reality is, obviously, what is scary for agencies, for practitioners, is there's some other party that will now call them out for not doing their work properly. So that is always an issue. But I think the reality is, once we understand, yes, you use measurement and evaluation to prove the value that you bring, of course. But the most important one is to learn and get learnings from what you're doing. You don't need to go and tell your direct client, we had a terrible campaign. But at least you should know, as the practitioner, that this isn't working. I need to explore other ways. And I think that is, we must get past that sort of a friction that you talk about, because no agency in any kind of environment, and not just PR, will ever tell their client that they did a terrible job, But it is in their own benefit to know where they make the mistakes or where they have those successes, because then they can optimize their own performance going forward. And I think that is a good ways to approach it.
Yeah. I was just going to say that I hate to use the word I see. Yeah, I'm back. I'm back. So I see the relationship more like the relationship between an accountant and an auditor. Both of them need, have basic training in accounting, right? The other guy is looking basically at, CapEx and OpEx. The auditor is doing a lot more in the area of forensics, trying to know why this was expended, the evidence, the proof, so that you can create some kind of transparency around the process. So, to a great extent, measurement exists. The niche focus agencies that are focused on measurement and evaluation, they exist essentially to drive transparency and to bring to the table, the impact of what's being done from an independent point of view. All right. So I don't really see it as a friction. I like the word. Was it Francis or was it Thomas that used the word education here? The more people are educated about the need for independent assessment, the more the partnership between the mainstream agencies and the measurement agencies will work. Already at a very global level, there are a number of measurement agencies that we've worked with, from Session to and all of that, with and I think that what needs to happen beyond just certification is to be able to bring to the table the logic behind your proprietary solution, so that it's not just seen as a plain vanilla kind of measurement that is speaking to to add value, PR value, and some of the old notions of measurement that a whole lot of traditional agencies have come to take for granted, to embracing some deeper insights and analytics coming through, so that the value is totally seen as, above bar. That way we begin to deepen the partnership. It's like in markets such as ours that is still a bit resistant to independent assessment, this may be an issue, but essentially education, like the last speaker said, will begin to throw open, that space for more partnership. However, a situation where the traditional agencies seem to have a stronger proprietary solution than that of the measurement organization. So you're going to be asking yourself, what value are you really bringing to the table that is any different? So you need to be able to show a value that's above bar, that speaks, especially in this day and age where machine learning and artificial intelligence is driving a whole lot of possibilities. And some of the proprietary solutions we even deploy, some of the measurement organizations don't have it. You'll be a little bit resistant to say that you need to show me above bar value in order to be able to convince me to want to use you. But essentially, it's not even in our tough, from the point of view where we come from. I don't work on the client side, I work on the consultancy side. If my client has chosen to hire an independent assessor for the work I'm doing, so be it, So I think beyond just trying to manage relationships with the agencies, you want to manage relationships on the client side, because the more the clients see a need to actually hire an independent assessor and keep that out of my bill, so that I'm not hemorrhaging in terms of funds, trying to have you on as my partner. The client then takes on that cost to enable me just do the things I'm doing in terms of designing the strategy and managing the execution. I'm probably just monitoring and showing outcomes at a limited phase. When the real time, proper time for an audit or an evaluation of what I've done comes, then you've got to take the notch higher by talking to, an independent assessor. So it's about partnership, it's about education, and it's about defining, what you offer as superior value, because you are niche and because you are focused on that. That will drive, some kind of synergy, than seeing it as a resistant or a tension-soaked relationship. It certainly isn't. Thank you.
Yeah, very quickly, just to, I love the accountant auditor relationship. I think that's a really useful perspective. On Francois' points about education and learning, yes, and yes again. I mean, that is that's the most critical point about all of this. And in the context of education and learning, I think it's really important how we think about this, where evaluation sits relative to PR activities, and how we then measure efficiencies and effectiveness and all of that, return on investment and accountability. I think it's really important that we look at any research activity, and I've earlier distinguished between analysis, measurement analysis and evaluation. Let's call that all research, and let's make sure that we all share an understanding that research plays a role at every stage on that journey. Jim McNamara, one of the leading thinkers about anything to do with measurement and evaluation, professor in Sydney, Jim uses this 3-stage approach to research, where he talks about formative research, process research, and summative research. So formative research for him is what you do up front as part of the planning process, and then process research is whilst an activity or campaign is being carried out, and then the summative research, that's what we usually, when we talk about evaluation, we think about something's happened, let's look at how good it was and how successful we were. Now, If we only look at that last bit, we're missing the most important part, because the most important part is the first step, is the formative research piece, because this is where thinking about what we want to achieve actually happens. When we set objectives, when we think, when we start asking questions about who is my audience, what is my audience's profile, where do they get their information from, what are the media channels they consume, what makes them tick, how do I reach them best, what are the resources for me to reach them, and then of course going back to objectives, what is it that I need to achieve? And then from that you then start thinking about, okay, so what do success measures look like, and metrics. You arrive at all that stuff, but the most important bit is really what Jim calls this front loading, front loading all the activities, ask the right questions, find the best possible data evidence, and then start planning. Don't think about evaluation as an afterthought, which I know is another one of your questions coming later on.
Okay, so let me just quickly add that I think it's important for measurement agencies, especially in our markets, to open more dialogues with brands and companies on the need for independent assessment. Like I mentioned earlier, most times you see brands here or companies here only have that PR agency that they work with, and the PR agency will be the one to do their own evaluation, which I don't think is the right approach. And secondly, I think it's important for the traditional agencies to see the measurement agencies as more as helpers to help them improve on whatever strategies that they have been putting out over the years. If they see it that way, it would more overall it would be better for the industry, right? So because an independent assessor would look at the campaigns that you've put across board, give you an independent assessment on it, on an unbiased assessment on it. That way, these traditional PR agencies are able to improve going forward. And I think that's the best approach for our markets, and it will be to the benefit of everyone in the industry. Okay, thank you. So I feel that when you think about PR more holistically, right, and recognize that it's part of something bigger and not like a standalone investment, it becomes easier to, should I say, measure the impact and the value. Okay, so I think you think of PR more like as a journey or an enabler, and not a single action or an event, because we see a lot of people think, oh, PR is more of an afterthought. So you only think of PR when there's a crisis, or you only think of PR when you have an event to do, right? But that shouldn't be the case. So, but that being said, right, PR must also drive business outcomes. So when you're talking to your directors or top management within the company, you should be able to clearly state what results you're able to generate with those PR actions or initiatives. And they should be able to be quantified, right? To say, if we're able to do all of this, this is what is going to happen. And you cannot just go about doing all of your various wonderful PR campaigns without clearly stating or without clearly evaluating it to see what the impact is going to be over time, or what the impact has been over time, right? So you start from the very basic, like all the other panelists have said, in defining those goals or those objectives, and then you are able to constantly check to be sure that you are meeting each of those earlier set objectives. So yes, I believe measurement and evaluation is very integral to public relations. If not, it's just going to always be seen as just another cost center or just another afterthought that would only come into place when there's a problem, especially in a market. And you agree with me. And when people talk about PR professionals, they only talk about them when it comes when you're dealing with a crisis or you're dealing with things around that, right? So it should go beyond that to show what more PR does to the overall outlook of the business, and clearly tie it into the strategic goals or strategy objectives of the business.
I think there's really three groups of practitioners: those who do not measure at all and they don't care, those who are using poor and discredited kind of measurements, and then those who are either starting or a bit more advanced on their best practices journey, like as dictated by the Barcelona principles. I think measurement, at least, has always been a big part of the modern public relations kind of industry. If you look at the media monitoring industry specifically, that is in fact quite much older as a sort of an industry as modern public relations. The first monitoring companies already started in the 1850s, whereas the modern PR kind of industry really only started becoming an industry here in the 20s and 30s. And I think if you look at where measurements or metrics such as the AVE came about in the 1930s, and that's why people wanted some kind of measurement, and unfortunately they took the wrong approach. But that's why it's critical. There's always been a need. But that is what amazes me. We are 8 decades later, the whole world has changed, but still a lot of practitioners are hanging on to measurements which was developed in the 1930s. So, and that is why the need for best practices also important. Thomas spoke about Prof. McNamara's formative research and all of that. I've actually got it as before, during, and after. You need to know if you've got a PR crisis or a situation that you want to address. You need to know what that situation is. You need to know, okay, people are complaining. You don't necessarily need to know the exact numbers, but you need to have an idea what is the situation you're trying to address. And obviously then you need to plan, and during your implementation you need to track it, and then eventually take those learnings from it. And I think that is where, for me, probably the biggest and most important change which can happen to any practitioner is to take that objectives approach, but also make it a smart objective approach, not just a fuzzy objective. If my boss tells me I need to increase our sales as an objective, 2 years from now, I've got one extra client who's spending $2 extra with me. Hey, I've reached that objective, but meantime, the business is closed down long ago. So that is why those smart objectives makes it important. And for me, it is critical. You cannot have measurement and your practice as totally different kind of things. I mean, why else would you want to do a campaign or something if you don't know if you're going to achieve it or not, or you don't know what success looks like? So for me, it's integral, but some people still think it is a afterthought, as was mentioned earlier as well. It's not an afterthought; it needs to be right up front.
Can I just say everything that Francois said, because that's that just wraps it up in a nutshell. No, I totally agree. I think measurement and evaluation has always been and will always be an integral part of PR. Where the distinction comes in is, is it done well or is it done poorly? Do the people crunching the numbers and drawing conclusions, do they actually understand what it is they want to achieve and need to achieve, which then brings me back to the importance in the communication planning. When we look at this entire planning to execution and then success measure cycle, the importance of putting more effort into the beginning in the formative research is absolutely critical about all of this. Just one little comment on what Francois was saying about it all having started in the 1850s. So very, very true. If you go to the Cision website, Cision being probably currently the largest integrated provider of these sorts of services. Of course, there are many other providers available. This isn't the sales pitch, but what's interesting about their website, there is a section about the corporate history of the company. When you look at that corporate history of the company, it starts in 1850, 1860 in Sweden with a clippings bureau or a press agency, and then something similar happened in the UK a little bit later, and then a little bit later in the US, and then over decades and decades and decades of companies being taken over, consolidation, technology, advancements and innovation and so on. But we're now in a space where a company such as Cision can offer fully integrated, singing, dancing, marketing and analytics services, online, offline. But it all started off with clippings, collecting cut out pieces of newspapers that talk about individuals and organizations. And the principle in a way is still the same. It's just everything around it has become a lot more complex.
Okay, so for me, measurement and evaluation is getting increasingly sophisticated. It's always been a part of PR since the days of the AVE, and all of the rudimentary stages of evaluation that we've gone through. However, it is now more important because we are now in a conversation economy where conversations actually, lead to, ROI impact for a lot of businesses. All right. So if I want to speak to a specific kind of audience because they perceive me in certain ways, and I want to change that perception because my business has since transitioned or my corporate behavior has since changed, so the way I'm being perceived, if it's just some form of idea in the head of the consumer that I need to change, I do not just need to end with setting the objective and designing the strategy and designing the tactical plans to achieve that. I also need to be able to measure and evaluate what the outcomes have been and whether the conversations I'm having is ideal and is moving in the direction that I want it to move. Okay? So to that extent, monitoring and evaluation now becomes more like something I need to work into my plan from the initiation stage, and not just something I start to think about when the cycle is getting completed. Because by the time I am now thinking of it at the end of the cycle, I'm probably going to be hitting the wrong targets. I would have hit the wrong target. Because if I have worked into my project initiation, then starting out, I'll probably do some form of dipstick research and surveys to be able to assess the opinion within this particular sphere that I want to target. And then as I carry on the campaign, midway through the campaign, I want to see the level of change that has occurred. And I want to look at it from an independent perspective, not just saddle my agency with the task of actually evaluating itself, all right, on this project. Then it then determines for me whether strategy needs to change or I need to reinforce what I'm doing, because the outcomes that are coming through for what I'm doing is actually verifiable, and the proprietary solutions being used are much more targeted and they achieve better outcomes. All right. So to that extent, I think that, this whole idea of conversation to commerce, conversation to industry, conversation to growth, change in policy behavior, conversation to understanding consumer trends and all of that, various conversations are happening. How do we track? How do we understand the changes that are coming through as a consequence of those conversations? This then makes measurement and evaluation a critical part of that process as opposed to an accessory to the process. So, point taken, all right? So what we then need to do, I hear Robert talking about agencies embracing it. I think it's more the client embracing the monitoring and evaluation and seeing it as something that should be standalone and having the requisite budgets to enable them also appoint independent assessors for the agencies they work with, as opposed to try. Because if you come to me, and Philip and I were having a conversation, I always say that the first thing you do as a business manager is to look at your cost. So you are not trying to replicate costs, across your cost heads. You're trying to reduce them, trying to get so much done at less cost, rather than bloating your budget because you want to show to clients phenomenal value. Phenomenal value is a consequence of, for me, is a consequence of the actions I'm taking in terms of designing the strategy, working through the tactical plans, and ensuring seamless execution. Success for me will then be who is able to independently assess what I've done to be able to validate what it is. It shouldn't be me that now goes down, across to another silo to say, hey, I'm going to make you walk up to my client and say, you need me. The client needs you. The client is going to say to me, at the end of all that you're doing, or from initiation stage, you are going to be sitting in the room with the guys who independently assess you. It's like when we set our annual operating plans, the audit side is always in the mirror because you are auditing a whole lot of expense, either from operating or capital expense. You are looking at what the tax outcomes will be, and you are designing solutions to already address some of the booby traps we've observed. That is the way it's got to function for the communication cycle, for it to work. And I think the guys who need the education the most are the guys who sit on the client side. They've got to understand that outside of having campaign budget, they must also have evaluation budget. I've sat in the room. I always like to make examples from clients I've worked with. I remember that one of the two clients I've had real nice experience working with, because there was independent assessments, and then when we do our reviews, it is from the point of view of the independent assessor as opposed to our point of view. We can then ask copious questions because we are also noting. It's like the same way your accountant is doing your management accounting, and at the end of the day, during the audit process, certain numbers will change because the auditor is peradventure bringing all manner of accounting principles to bear and asking for depreciation here and asking for you to write off this, or asking for you to amortize this across a field. So what needs to then happen is that we need to sit in the room, the clients being present, and telling the clients, when you design your annual operating plan around the communications you want to hold from quarter to quarter, building evaluation as part of the cost. But essentially, it's not a cost item. It is something that enables you to be able to then have assurances around what you're doing, so that if it's not working right, you can change course. If it's working right, you can reinforce your actions. So that's why I think it needs to go. Thank you. Yeah, you know, when in designing your PR objective, you also want to look at the direction the business is going. So your objective cannot be working against your strategic goals as a business, right? So let's say, for instance, the metric is that we want to grow presence with certain demographics. Okay, so let's take, for instance, a telecom business. In order to be able to drive high average revenue per user, we want to work with high income professionals, high net worth individuals, and we want to build presence in certain enterprise markets, you know, stuff like that. So that when I'm designing my PR program and I'm setting an objective, I immediately factor that into the entire process, that I want to grow here, I want to do this. So there's no way you can separate, therefore, your objective, return on objective, and return on investment. If the return on objective works out right, the return on investment will possibly also turn out right. So essentially what you're saying is that you need to move beyond just setting those objectives and putting them on the shelf, but putting them to work in such a way that it meets your investment needs, and it actually shows copiously that what we've done actually helps us achieve our investment goals. So for instance, I work for a brand in the telecom space. They have a very good bottom of the pyramid strategy, so they've been able to harvest numbers. So they speak to mass market. Now you want to move that mass market conversation. You want to now make it niche and focused on certain strategic markets where they see growth opportunities. Therefore, my objectives will be set right around that. So rather than, to bring it alive, mobile number portability, I want to harvest critical number. And the guy says, no, I don't want the mass. My network is not as robust. But I have solutions designed for enterprise users. So I want communications to speak to enterprise users. So you then set your objective. And your objective may be different from another company who is trying to target the mass. At the end of the day, when you look at your strategy, so evaluation, that's why I said that this linkage between having your management accountant and your auditor, it then comes to bear. What objective did we set? In evaluation, what have we actually achieved in terms of visibility and linkages to the markets where we see growth? Then we then go back and plug out the numbers and say, in terms of visibility, you moved from 20% presence in this market, share of voice in this market, to about 80% share of voice over a course of 12 months. However, these are the weaknesses in terms of evaluation, because it's not translating to return on objective, is not translating to return on investment. It means then that is either the message is not connecting, so evaluation needs to show that, or essentially our presence there is supposed to focusing messages that connect with those audiences. So that's where the alignment between return on objective and return on investment begins to play out.
So building on what Bolaji just said, I think we always need to tie together the organizational perspective and the communication perspective. And by organizational perspective, we need to make, as he just pointed out, we need to be specific about the context in which we're operating. You know, is this product focused? Is it more corporate focused? You know, understand your space, then you know how to ask the right questions. And again, going back to this, upfront research, collect the data that helps you answer those questions. But to have this link between ROO and ROI, I think what really helps are frameworks that tie together the idea of organizational objectives and how communications activities contribute to that, and then look at that on a sort of a time axis, but also a task axis of and the integrated evaluation framework that AMEC has put together and keeps evolving really helps with that perspective. So starting with the inputs and then thinking through what kind of communication outputs can be generated. What do these outputs lead to in terms of potential outcomes, i.e. what does an audience do with that, and how can that then longer term translate into impact? Because only impact metrics are really, you know, helping you achieve or are a proof of whether or not you're achieving your objectives. So you have to really go beyond the pure media perspective and the pure media intelligence perspective, and you know, achieving some, you know, measure of success around message penetration and stuff like that. Those are important. They contribute to the overall outcome, but you have to have a much more comprehensive, a much more, in a sense, I guess, holistic view of your space, and you know, take on board stakeholder perspectives, understand what constitutes intangible value for an organization, and then build analysis and evaluation models that, you know, look at the totality of what needs to be achieved with different kinds of metrics. It's a big ask, but ultimately, if we're serious about this business of, you know, linking ROI and ROI, then I think that's where we need to go.
I think, you know, if you're, again, it all ties back to SMART objectives, as we've said, which need to align with organizational objectives. If your task is to change behavior or create some awareness, and you do not have specific financial goals in place, then you can't report on financial results, for instance, what this impact had for you. So it is all really to do with the planning and framing it correctly, as Thomas said. I mean, there are great case studies, and what's very important here in continuation of what Thomas said is we need to look outside of just purely the media space. But I think the modern world's also given us some easy wins from that perspective. If you need to sign up customers to buy your insurance product, for instance, have a backlink in your article where you can click through to the website. Because if that clicks through into your CRM system of the business, you can link it back to your article. And let's say 10 people download a brochure and one of them signs up for 50,000 Naira a month, you can link that back to your activity. But if you didn't think it and plan it up front, it's going to be very difficult to show that. But even things like internal communication, because we always forget that as part of the you know, our processes and public relations and all of that. If you need to run a campaign for your own staff to reduce the turnover of staff in your organization, for instance, you can measure financial results on that, because obviously recruitment costs can be quite an expensive cost to an organization. So you want to keep your good people, and you can then track, has your recruitment costs come down, or is it staying the same, because obviously something is not working there. So even in those kind of organizational spheres, you can, if you take and plan it correctly, measure financial results and impacts, but that is not obviously the only objective. If I run a health campaign for the Department of Health to reduce smoking, for instance, yes, way down the line there could be impacts on the government's budget, but you need to keep in mind what those specific objectives are. And if you do, it becomes much more sophisticated. But I think the reality is that if you look at the C-suite, there's a simple formula for return on investment. It's either increased sales or decreased costs minus your investment divided by the investment. That's how the accountants look like it and add it to the CEO. And I have almost never seen that formula, which is utilized everywhere in the world and has been for many, many decades, PR and commerce people talking about it. If I show them that formula in kind of the sessions I present, they are amazed. But you need to educate yourself about those kind of things as well. If it's a financial result, you need to show it. You need to be able to talk the financial language. There's a lot of data in an organization, CRM data, data which the IT team sits on. And if you look at all these data in isolation, they become really worthless. But if you start marrying it, it's amazing what can happen. And we can learn a lot from even the advertising industry there. For instance, here in South Africa, the one insurance brand is really flooding the market with a lot of different executions, TV ads. And for you and me watching the TV ad, it may look exactly the same on all the channels we may watch it. But if you look closely, there's maybe a 5-digit number which you need to text. Now, if you look closely, that digit will be different on each television channel, even though the ad may look exactly the same. So if someone texts that number, give me more info, they can immediately, on a basic level, even determine on which channel that person saw the ad, because they plan it like that. But we don't, in many cases, we don't think like that, and that's why it becomes a challenge for us.
All right, thank you. So I think for ROO, it's more about the measure of success of how well your campaign or your initiative have been able to achieve its overall objective. And just like every other speaker said, which is very important. So I think it's very important to state clearly at the beginning what are those objectives. And that way you're able to measure what the return on that objective is. So I see it more as a check on your progress and a check on your goals during like a short term, more or less. Whereas for a return on investment, it's more about how well you've been able to leverage the investments that you've put into the campaign or the initiative. And you would agree with me that most companies right now, and just like Mr. Francois has said, there's a lot of data across board. And I think it's just for PR professionals to be intentional about making those measurements, right? So like you rightly said, using those backlinks in your articles, it could even extend beyond that. So I know most people feel like in terms of traditional PR and things like that, you're not able to track how well or how much the return on investment is that you've put into it. But I think it's also possible to be done in that space. It could even be an event coverage. There's a certain way you can use some certain codes or vouchers to ensure that everything coming from that way, you're able to link it back to that event that you organize in terms of creating brand awareness and things around that. So in all, it's just for PR professionals to be intentional, because again, that is the only way to move the needle in terms of seeing PR as just an afterthought, or seeing PR as just something that you do that cannot be tracked. So I think it's just just to emphasize on being intentional with tracking those investments that you put into it, and ensuring that you're able to present it clearly to the board or to the directors or to the client on how well you've been able to navigate the campaigns, and then the quantifiable data on the investment.
Well, I don't know if I always overcome them, but we try. Um, I think because of the kind of world we live in, and I'm talking specifically the comms and PR and advertising kind of world where we work with brands and organizations and agencies. Um, a crisis does not keep office hours. Um, so I think that is a challenge which comes with the territory. Uh, I've had clients WhatsApping me messages at 12 o'clock on a Sunday night looking for something by 7 o'clock on a Monday morning. And I think what exacerbated this was the pandemic. Everyone started working from home. So those lines between the office and personal lives became very much blurred. So that is a challenge. And I think now that things are normalizing, a lot of that remains because it's now almost the norm. So that is definitely a challenge, I think, which unfortunately comes with our territory. I think obviously another challenge is educating clients about best practices, and you need to understand that it takes time. I've been giving workshops and sessions to clients, the same clients, for years, and eventually the light bulb went on, but it took years. It's not just one or two sessions. And suddenly a whole new world's opened up for them and they're amazed at what they're seeing now. But that's the thing. I think it's just to be, you have to have a tough skin, and keep fighting and keep pushing the same message, because eventually it will break through. But you just need to be persistent.
Okay, so just like Francois said, I think we are still overcoming them, right? In terms of crisis, I think that is the biggest challenge. Should I say, fortunately or unfortunately, I haven't worked on the agency side, so I've always been on the client side. But especially in the industry that I find myself in currently, you have issues that can spring up on Sunday, 11 p.m., and you have to be on it immediately, right? So I know at the very start of my career, I used to have this anxiety whenever my phone is ringing. I'm like, what is it again? Like those kind of things, right? So it's just to be more proactive. I think that was the way I was able to, should I say, deal with those early struggles, being proactive with how to respond to some of these issues, and understanding that every market is different, every industry is different. When I was in the financial services space, the way we were handling those kind of crises is not the same as the way we're doing it right now in the e-commerce space. So just on understanding more or less the different industries and how to tackle these issues as they come on board. But in all, I also see that most companies right now, they tend to, should I say, reach out more to people even outside the office, right? And just like Francois said, it's because of COVID-19, right? So right now, a lot of people, we practice hybrid systems across board. So yeah, you can be reached out to at any point in time, and most employers would be expecting a response. And that wasn't the case, should I say, 3, 4, 5 years ago, right? So I think those are the challenges currently, and then it's a continuous effort to overcome them, more or less. And on a final challenge or a final note, I would want to also highlight the fact that most organizations, or especially in this country, see CPR as just an afterthought, more or less. I think that's a big challenge. I know at the very beginning of my career, PR used to just be a sub under marketing, right? I know the story has changed in recent times, but that was always a struggle. They just see it as just one sub unit under the marketing team, but it shouldn't be the case, more or less. Yeah. So we are seeing more modern CEOs or modern companies understanding the value of PR, and that's based on how most PR professionals over time has been able to navigate the space and show the value that they bring into organizations. And we've seen a take up in appreciating PR professionals across board.
Okay, well, thinking back to my days when I was actively involved in designing and then delivering so-called media intelligence solutions for clients, I guess the permanent issue was always clients wanting more for less, more service for less money, and then you have to overcome that. But I want to take a slightly different take on this and talk about one of my biggest bugbears, if you want, or niggles in our space, and that is the misuse of the term insights, as in, you know, having an insights dashboard, for example. A good friend of mine, Sam Knowles, has written an excellent book about this topic. The book's called How to Be Insightful, and it highlights the various stages that you need to think about when it comes to developing insights, the really hard work that needs to go into finding those insights, and it really is a process. And what I have increasingly seen happening over the years, especially with, you know, the increasing integration of different data feeds into automated dashboards and so on, we seem to be treating every description of every chart or, you know, data table as an insight. And if we do that, I think we really devalue the concept a little bit. So automated, and I keep saying this when I, you know, in the AMEC course, pretty much every week I make the same point, saying automated dashboards do not generate insights. People generate insights, you know, through expertise, through experience, through access to excellent data evidence. Of course, we need excellent data evidence, but most importantly, it's the ability to connect dots, you know, spot patterns that haven't been spotted before. That's insight. An automated dashboard isn't. So essentially, again, that's an issue of education and learning, and also setting the right expectations with clients and then delivering against them. So I don't have an ultimate solution for it. I do like Sam Knowles' framework of looking at, you know, insights and the hard graft that goes into it and everything. But that is one of the big challenges that I keep working on in, you know, trying to educate and make people more aware of what's good and bad, again, when we look at insights.
Well, as a manager, first and foremost, before by being an agent to a client, yes, as a manager, the biggest challenge has been, how do I get the optimal outcomes, you know, based on the structure and the people I work with? How do I get the right fit for the roles that have been mapped out to serve in certain categories? the talent, where right now the Gen Z generation are much more entrepreneurial. They do not want delayed gratification. So to be able to get a resourceful talent right now, who is practically not doing their own thing, whether as a small business or as a micro business, is tough. So you find that you do not, most of the time, you got to go through a whole lot of trial and error to be able to get the right fit for defined roles. Or where you train, and hopefully be able to inject the right kind of knowledge and the impetus to actually get them to actually play the role, because you have different kinds of clients and no manager can do it alone. So that's a big challenge. On the client side, the challenge is, how do I do more for less? Essentially, the whole cost equation thing, because everybody's pressured, all right? Clients want to get the best for less. They want to be able to do more for less. And what has thrown this up is the entire COVID-19 scenario, where a whole lot of, things happened in such a way that clients were able to see that I could actually reduce my cost if I did this. If I took this out, it will not have fundamental impact on my operations, and it will not affect my market pungently. So in those conversations, it's becoming increasingly clear that the client is getting smarter. So there's a need for agencies or consultants that serve this client to also become smarter, if they hope to be able to run away with the right kind of budget that keeps their operations running and make them profitable. Essentially, the same thing I've said about hiring an evaluation company. Whose role is it? From a cost perspective, it is the role of the client. It's not my role. I shouldn't be building my operation in such a way that I had more costs. All right? And that depletes my bottom line, and that depletes my capacity to be able to react, okay, as I would want to. All right? Because I've already frittered my cost. So if I go to a client now and I say, I want an independent assessor for the things I'm doing, the client says, can we take out of your budget? You ask the question, I'm not sure you really should be doing that. Then the guy said to me, now that you've suggested it, I think we're going to be smart by half. Whatever is allocated to you, we'll have to divide a portion of it to get that to happen. And that reduces the cost. Okay. So that's as a manager speaking now. So again, back to the client. It is the whole idea of they're wanting so much for less. And of course, because we live in a conversation economy, there are a whole lot of alternatives to what you offer. The hybrid agencies, if they come to the table and they're able to show value from their own angle doing it online than what you do, then you probably will have to add on skills to be able to match them and offer superior solutions. All right, they don't have the legacy burden you have, so they are nimble, they are faster, and they're able to deliver. So in terms of a whole lot of the areas that are new and novel, you have to actually train and retrain your people to adapt. The hybrid agencies don't have that legacy burden. They're just structured for the new and the novel, so they deliver the new and the novel. So for you to stay in business and be able to surmount your challenge, you've got to increasingly innovate. Keep changing. That's the major challenge. So talk about the chameleon. You have to be very, very adaptive. You have to take on the color of the terrain. So that if you don't want to get eaten by the enemy, you take on the color of the terrain so that you are able to, adapt and thrive. So essentially that's it. Thank you.
I think I just wanted to add to what Robert said earlier. With the pandemic, a lot of brands, particularly in our market, had to stop advertising. You look at fast food or whatever, there was lockdown. So they actually stopped their advertising budgets. But this created a great opportunity for PR and communicators, because they had to come to the forefront. And I think that's something we need to keep in mind. We also launched some research just yesterday with our AMEC event for the South African landscape around public relations. And, public relations during the pandemic and the pandemic has actually helped the whole profession to become a bit more visible to the C-suite, for instance. And there's an opportunity for everyone there. And that's why the professionalization of the industry is so important. I just wanted to add that.
All right, thank you. So you're right, right? It's a global thing. It's not only a Nigerian thing, right? Yeah. And during periods like this, more consumers set like stricter priorities and they reduce their spending. So it's a bit difficult to get more people on board. However, um, the consumers are prioritizing their consumption, like I rightly said, and they are sorting through different products or services. And most of them more or less put it into categories. So you have consumers that are more, they put products into maybe like essentials, and they know that this is what we need, necessary for survival, more or less, right? And some put other products into a category called treats. They know that okay, these are just indulgences, that immediate purchase that they can use to that are more or less justified, and then on and on in the other two, postponables, expendables, and the likes, right? So, but the thing is, as a brand or as a brand or as a company, you also need to put your products into these categories as well, because you know that customers are, in particular, they are looking for the best deals. So how do you re-strategize your products? So especially in our market now, you notice across board, especially in periods like this, you start seeing some products that put into, should I say, smaller packs or put into sachets. Why are companies doing this? Because they are also adjusting to economic reality, right? So I think that's the best way for brands and companies to go. If you want to gain new clients within this period, you also need to think or put yourself in the shoes of the client, because you know that the purchasing power within this period right now, or disposable income for most people within this period, is already diminished, right? So how do you provide value? Still provide optimal value to the customer or to the consumer, right? But in a way that you don't need, the customer doesn't need to go overboard in terms of acquiring that service or product. So let me leave it at that, so that I do not take everything and allow the other panelists answer that.
So I'd say that you have to keep innovating. All right. Even in the last, the whole idea of VUCA, has been with us for a while. All right. So it's not about to disappear. So whether we're seeing a pandemic of global proportion that shook our entire healthcare system, or we're seeing the war in Russia and the war in Ukraine being fought by Russia, shaking our political and economic system to its foundation, we're going to consistently live with disruption. And so because disruption has become the new normal, the only way to surmount the booby traps of disruption is to keep innovating. Starting out from our side, as the fact that we cannot operate the way we used to operate anymore. Costs are thinning out. The client is getting smarter. The client is looking for newer opportunities and seeking new advantage in the market. We can no longer operate the way we used to operate. So we need to build in the online space. You know, the internet has dethroned the television as the most consumed media. And increasingly, we are beginning to see that, with the Internet of Things, a whole lot is changing in terms of the way we operate, with less office spaces and more work at home scenarios. With the consumer now being so sophisticated, he's choosing the click above the brick in terms of consideration. In like manner, we have to innovate and be, ahead of the curve in terms of our learning, and adaptability. So, for instance, we need to stress more digital as part of our operations as opposed to the way we used to do things. Number one, we'll reduce costs. We'll be able to serve the client better, and we'll be able to actually, then intelligence becomes a strategic asset. So what clients are looking for, the delivery of top-notch insights that enable them to get more efficient and to plug that back into ROI insights, that work for them and deliver better outcomes in terms of return on investment. So I give you an example. What are the likely policy consequences for instance, of sugar tax from a communication perspective? How do we surmount that? What are the likely impact of the regulation of the online space and how that affects our practice? And stuff like that. So intelligence and insight there becomes a critical asset, because you are not just going to be innovating on the wrong corridors. You are going to be innovating in the areas where opportunities are, abound, in order to be able to then get your operations to become more nimble, and then you can actually be able to derive better return on outcomes from what you're doing in such a way that you keep the client. And over the long haul, you wait out the disruption, and let's hope that the world order will change and we'll get to see more stability. But if it's not the healthcare scare, it's going to be a political and economic scare. So we had better be ready, at least in the next 1 or 2 decades, to live with disruptions. It's not running away. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll keep that very short also in the interest of time. Most important point has already been made, I think, by Robert. Put yourself in the client's shoes. I think that's really key. Listen to understand clients' problems. Don't listen to just sell your stuff. And I've mentioned Sam Knowles before. He keeps saying, speak human, be curious, and learn how to ask smarter questions, which is also Ask Smarter Questions is another title of one of his books, but I'm not trying to sell his books. They are useful though. Do these things, speak human, be curious, ask smarter questions. And then if you do these kinds of things, you'll differentiate yourselves from your competition in a way that maybe will make tough economic conditions a bit less of a problem. So that's all I want to say to that.
I think, everyone's under price pressure. Everyone wants to save money. So you better make sure you can prove value to the client. And I think just as a final note on that, speak to them, shout it off the rooftops. That doesn't just go for our industry, but any industry. People need to know about you. Go knock on those doors and keep pushing at it. I've got so many, but for our report, which we launched yesterday, I actually wrote an article on lessons we can learn about measurement evaluation from Nelson Mandela. And one of them, you all better go and download it. It's on the Ornico website. The one quote which I used in there is a very famous quote, but it's education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. And I think, again, that for me is, if you don't know what is possible, you're in for a tough ride. But the more you explore, the more you learn, the more you know, the more you realize there's so much more to learn. And it's an amazing journey, and a lot of opportunities open up for you.
Okay, so mine is more, I think, I saw this sometime, I think 2 years ago back. It's from, I think, George Bernard Shaw. And he says something like, the only man who behaves sensibly is my tailor. He takes my measurements every time he sees me, right? And while the rest go on with old measurements and expect me to fit into them. I just think he more or less expresses the way I feel most times about measurement and evaluation, because most times people just keep running along with the things that they've been doing in the past, as opposed to measuring, evaluating, and ensuring that they tweak their strategy based on the feedback that they've gotten from those measurements.
Oh, I love that George Bernard Shaw quote. I have to look that up and start using it very, very, very intensively. Brilliant. I think the standard response to that kind of question from most people is something by Peter Drucker, right? The management guru. So either people will quote, you can't manage what you don't measure. Yes. Or the best way to predict the future is to create it, which is either by Peter Drucker or Abraham Lincoln. I'm not quite sure. So, those are good kind of standard quotes. But my favorite measurements and evaluation quote is actually from a book that was written 100 years ago by the man we call the father of PR, Edward Bernays. Most of you will have heard his name. So in 1923, he wrote a book called Crystallizing Public Opinion, which was his first book. He then published many more. He lived till the age of 103. But in this first book, it's his blueprint for what was then obviously a very, very new discipline, namely public relations. And in the foreword of this book, he described his intention as outlining the broad principles that govern the new profession of public relations counsel, substantiated by the findings of psychologists, sociologists, and newspapermen, to stimulate a scientific attitude towards the study of public relations. I've read this book several times. I'm quite fascinated by Bernays, and I'm fascinated that he was also the nephew of Sigmund Freud, as many people know who are interested in this field. So psychology was front and center for him. This description of public relations as a scientific discipline 100 years ago, I think is quite significant. It kind of got lost a little bit over time, and it's been misinterpreted, and we had Gruenik's excellence theory and all of that. But I think taking the scientific approach seriously in terms of how we apply research, but also how we think more holistically and more in a more integrated way about what it means and how communication can contribute to sort of overall objectives, I think will take us quite a long way forward, and we're not doing enough of it, and it's well worth rereading Bernays every now and then.
Two quotes actually come to mind. Peter Drucker's "You can't manage what you can't measure" comes to mind quite clearly here. The second quote is by Albert Einstein, when he says, the most important thing to do is never to stop questioning. So if you don't question, you don't get the right outcomes. Okay, so those are my quotes. You can't manage what you don't measure, and the most important thing, never stop questioning. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you.
Take care, all.
Thank you, everyone. Bye for now.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mr. Bolaji.
Bye.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Thank you, Mr. Sunday.